So, and this part up here at the top, I skipped over it in a couple of classes just because of time, so I'm not 100% sure did we draw angles up there? We did, okay. All right, so, and then I asked you if angles 1, 2, and 3 were supplementary. What's the answer? No, okay, so angle 1, angle 2, I just need to rewrite it right there, and angle 3 are not supplementary. Why? Because it's more than 2 angles, because there's 3. Good. They are not supplementary. They do add to give you 180, but they're not supplementary. We just wouldn't call them that. Okay, good. And then, I know I finished this in every class, but I don't know, I might have been yelling it at you as the bell was ringing. I don't know if we actually finished it and I was able to, like, we did. I'd go, oh, look at that. Okay. All right, good deal then. So then we will start here. Okay, so 2 times an angle is 10 degrees less than 3 times the measure of its supplement. Actually, I'm going to go back because there was a good question, and I don't think it was in this class, so I want to make sure I said that to everybody. Right here, when we were done with writing this formula, or writing this equation, somebody said, well, I thought you said that English was backwards. Why didn't you flip it around? And so when I had him clarify what he meant, it's like he was wondering why I had this, but I didn't change it to 2 times 90 minus x minus 3, like why I didn't change this around. And that's because mathematically it doesn't matter either way, right? The part that we got to make sure that we get that's backwards, because it may still, like the whole sentence, maybe this part would have come first if you were to translate it into another language. But the backwards part of this is that 3 degrees less, that if we do 3 minus, that's not, we can't translate it word for word like that. Okay, so that's really the only backwards part of that there. Does that make sense? Just got to make sure you're reading it in context. Okay. So I'm going to give you a second. I want you to write the equation for this. So translate it from English to math. Okay, you can write it right above it if you want to along the sentence. And then you do that while I go check roll. All right, so 2 times an angle is 10 degrees less than 3 times the measure of its supplement. Okay, so 2 times an angle. How would we represent that? 2x, because the angle is x, right? Is, what does this mean in math? Equals 10 degrees less, minus 10 or negative 10, than 3 times what? 180 minus x. Okay? So we just translated a little bit at a time. That's what we end up with. So we get 2x equals negative 10 plus 3 times 180 minus x. Oops. All right, everybody okay with that? Good? All right, so then I just solve it. So 2x equals negative 10 plus, okay, so let's do this in pieces. What's 3 times 100? 300. What's 3 times 80? 240. Well, 24, and then you put the 0 on it, right? So 240. So I got 300 and 240, and together that's 540. Okay, so 540, then what? 3x. Good. So that's going to give me 5x equals 530. So x goes into 5 once. So is it 160? Yes? Yes, 160? Y'all agree with that? Everybody? You sure about that? I'm just asking you for sure. Y'all are telling me it's right. Is that right? No, it is not right. But it's 106. This is a very common wrong answer because you go, okay, well, 5 goes into 5 once. It goes into 36 times. Oh, I got to stick a 0 on it. Yeah, that is not the right answer. Okay? 5 goes into 5 once. It doesn't go into 3, so 0 times. So then 30, it's 106. Right? Okay? I see things like 160 all the time. All right. So then it asks, so it says, what it's actually asking for is, it says find the measure of its supplement. What does x represent? The angle. I don't even care about that. That number isn't even part of my answer. I just want the supplement. So to find that, I do 180 minus 106. So the supplement is what? 74 degrees. And we'll talk a lot more about AP grading as the year goes on, but on the free response questions, there's a total of 9 points for each question. So each point is just something, you know, it's special when you can get it. You get points for, depending, I mean, it just depends on the problem, but you could get a point for showing that you substitute something back in to get your final answer. So if doing something like that right there is one of your 9 points, that's huge. That's a point you absolutely shouldn't miss. And I will say that on the quiz, which you will get back today, the last question, part of one of, because there's always partial credit, but one of the things I was looking for was you taking the X that you got and showing that you substituted back in to get the length. And the great majority of you did that beautifully, even when it wasn't that hard. You did that. That means you're listening and you understand that the process is important. So that's good, and you need to keep that up. And remember, because your opinion about whether or not it's stupid is irrelevant. So is my opinion. I mean, our opinions just have to stay out of this. It is what it is. Okay, any questions? Good? All right. So next one. This says solve for X and identify the type of angle pair. So this second part of the question is kind of like the explain part. And if you can't do that part, you can't solve for X. So even though it's the second part, you do that first, because whether you realize it or not, you're doing that when you're setting it up, right? So what type of angle pair is this? That's labeled vertical angles, right? So I can write out they are vertical angles. So what do we know about vertical angles? They're congruent. The vertical angles are congruent, and they are formed by two intersecting lines, right? So which one of those two things helps us with the measure? The congruent part, right? So yeah, they're formed by two intersecting lines, but that doesn't tell me anything about their measures. So the more important part of that is actually the theorem, which is that they're congruent, which means that their measures are equal. Okay, the angles are congruent, so the measures are equal. So do I add these together and do something with them? No, because I just told myself that I do what with them? Set them equal to each other. So I can do 120 equals 2x minus 10. So 130. So x equals what? 65. Okay. Is it 65 degrees? No, because if this was 65 degrees and I plugged it back in, then I would end up with degrees to the degree power, which is like degrees squared, which makes no sense, right? So make sure you're paying attention to what your answer actually means and what it represents. And do I need to plug it back into anything? Solve for X. It says solve for X. Did you do that? Yes. And identify the type of angle pair. Did you do that? Yeah, then we're done. Okay. On one of the homeworks you're going to get back, the segments one, the last two problems said solve for each variable, and most of you solved for the variable, x, r, whatever it was, and then plugged it back in and found each length, okay, which was totally unnecessary and a whole lot of work you didn't need to do. Because once you got x, that was it. So read the directions, make sure you're answering the question that's being asked. All right, so let's look at this next one. It says solve for the variables and identify the type of angle pairs. All right. So do we have more than one type of angle pair here? Yes. What's one type of angle pair you see labeled? Okay, I see a linear pair. What else do you see? Vertical angles. Oops. All right, so what do you know about vertical angles? They're congruent. What do you know about linear pairs that helps you with measurement? They are, what's the word for it? They are adjacent, but the adjacent part doesn't help me with the measurement. But yes, that's part of it. They're supplementary. Good. Okay. So I've got two different things. And because I'm looking for X and Y here, I'm going to have to use both of them, right? So if I start with, we'll start with the linear pair because we had that first. I've got this linear pair and I've got this linear pair, right? So we'll just start with this one because it doesn't really matter. And this is going to give me 2x plus 25. Do I set them equal to each other? No. I add that to y and set it equal to what? 180. Okay. So if I was to try and solve that, do I run into a problem? Yes. What's my problem? I have two variables. So if I have two variables, what do I have to have in order to actually get answers? Two variables means I have to have two equations, because I don't have. If I just have one equation, I can solve for y and I can solve for x, but it's still going to have a variable in it, right? So if I have two variables, I have to have two equations with the same two variables, or I can't do that. So I've got two options here. I can either use the other linear pair, and set up another one. Or I can use my vertical angles. I use the vertical angles. Because when I use the vertical angles, do I add these together? No. So I get 2x plus 25 equals 3x minus 10. So I've got these two equations and two variables. What's that called? A system of equations, right? Remember, as silly as it sounds, step number one is identify it, and I only heard a couple people even start to try and say it. If you have two equations and two variables, you have a system of equations. Your options right now for solving them are substitution and elimination. Okay? Which one would make more sense here? Substitution. Because to set up elimination, you got to line stuff up. I don't even have a y over there, which is actually a very good thing, right? I mean, I don't even have it. So here, if I solve for one variable, I get it's still a variable in there. There, I only have one variable. Even though there's only one in there, this is still a system because I still have two equations with two variables. But I can easily solve this for x, right? And then I can take it and I can substitute it in here and get a value for y. Does that make sense? Okay, so I start over here. This is going to give me just 35 equals x. Well, that's pretty easy. Here's my x. Then I'm going to plug that in right here. So I'm going to get 2 times 35 plus 25 plus y equals 180. So 2 times 35 is 70 plus 25 is 95. So 95 plus y equals 180. So what does y equal? 85. All right, so do I need to plug these back in? I found it. It says solve for the variables. Check, got that. Identify the type of angle pairs, got that. So I'm done, right? Does that make sense? Reread the question. When you think you're done, reread the question, because maybe you're not done, or maybe you are, or maybe you didn't read it soon enough and then you've gone too far. But make sure you can answer the question that's being asked. Any questions about that? All right. Okay, so let's talk about the different, let's kind of sum this up here. What are the different angle pairs that we've talked about? Give me one. Adjacent, okay, I heard that. So adjacent angles. What else we got? Linear pair. What else? Supplementary. Vertical. And complementary. All right, so then let's also look at what does this tell us about their measurements. What can you tell me about vertical angles as far as their measurements are concerned? Okay, the angles are congruent. The measurements are equal and the angles are congruent, right? Complementary. Two angles that, do each one of them equal 90? No. They're together, so you have to add them. So their sum equals 90. Now, when you hear complementary, 90 should pop into your head. Right, that's fine. Complementary in your brain should like trigger 90. But I don't want you to turn that into complementary means 90 because it doesn't. Complementary is the sum of two angles is 90, right? So as long as you can kind of translate that after the 90 pops in your head, you're good. Supplementary, two angles that add to give you 180. Okay. All right. Linear pair. What do you know about them? They are supplementary, good, which means they're going to add to give me 180 also. And it does make a line. Okay, so as far as, you know, there's things you should know about all these angles, but the ones that's going to help you with the measurements. What about adjacent angles? Does it tell you anything about their measurements? Okay, they have to share a point and a side. Does that tell you anything about their measurements? Nope. So this is just going to be question mark here. That doesn't tell us anything about their measurements. So we would have to know more than that if we're going to set something up. Okay. Nathan? Did somebody save your life? Okay. Make sure you tell them thank you. All right. Any questions about any of this? We good? All right. So if this isn't already glued in, can do that. And then on your homework, what I had said was that really I only wanted you to start on these three right here because that was really the only notes you had. You probably could have made it through the rest. But yes, you have to go back now and do the rest. This is due on Wednesday for everybody. On the type of pair, if you feel like there needs to be more than one name there, that's fine. Because linear pair is better than supplementary, but yeah, it would be both. If they're adjacent, that's true, but does adjacent tell me anything about measurement? No, so you would also need to have like the type that tells you basically how to set it up. Okay, does that make sense? Any questions? All right, I'm going to give you the other part of your test review.